Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Product Launch Podcast. As always, I'm the host, Sean Boyce. Today, my guest is Jim Paolino from LodeStar. Hello, Jim. How are you? And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, for our guest here, please let us know what LodeStar is and tell us a little bit about how it came to be.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Sean. LodeStar is a company I started about 7 years ago. We're a provider of data to any mortgage lender, basically. So if we tell people how much they're going to pay when they buy a house, is the line I always like to use for it at cocktail parties of, when someone comes in, they buy a house, they need to know three important things, or want to know at least. What's your interest rate? How much are you going to pay every month? How much cash do I need to close? So we really work on that last piece of data, is how much money do you need to bring to close on this loan? Obviously your down payment, but there are a lot of other fees that people generally don't realize, usually about 3 to 5% of your purchase price you're going to have to pay in closing for things like insurance, taxes. Furthermore, the lender, whoever's giving you the loan, actually is held accountable to whatever number they give you, and they need to guarantee that data. So we aggregate that data for the industry, guarantee it and automate it for providers, people like Navy Federal Credit Union, top 10 home builders, as a way of helping those businesses save time and money.
Got it. So streamlining the process, improving the accuracy, more predictive, that kind of thing?
Yep, absolutely.
That's excellent. Yeah, I've been through the process of buying a home a few times, and it is amazing how much magic there appears to be with how things come together. So any transparency there or consistency, I think would be definitely the best.
Pennsylvania is not the easiest state as well, too. You'd think that some things they could just look up online, but then you're waiting 6 weeks for a tax search or something like that. And I've seen very, very smart friends of mine with master's degrees in finance have no clue when they're going through the process. So it's definitely an area that needs more visibility at the end of the day.
That's excellent. Well, I'm glad that you guys are offering value to the market in that area. So tell me a little bit about how LodeStar came to be, because I believe it's a really cool story. I mean, we talked a little bit about it before, and I'd love to share a little bit of that story with the audience.
So probably about 10 years ago now, I was in college. I grew up in the space, so to speak. My family still runs a small title insurance company. Basically, they're the people who do your closings or refinance your mortgage. They handle escrow, so the exchange of funds. So they put the stamp on everything and get the money to where it has to go, make sure everything's recorded in the public record. So I'd always been involved in that company in some way, shape, or form. Honestly, at that time, it was more moving boxes of old files. Things were digitized. So I'd get a U-Haul truck, and that would be my main job. But I was studying engineering at the time. They had a problem. They basically needed to tell their customers how much they were going to pay. There's a requirement coming down, like many businesses, probably that you see in SaaS especially. Regulation or fear is a very powerful motivator. So that was really what started of, hey, we have a problem. We need to figure out how to solve it in a couple of months. What can you do? So I'm by no means a good programmer, but I was able to put together basically a calculator that helps them aggregate all that information, deliver it to their clients. There was a January 1st, 2010 deadline. I think it was ready December 29th, maybe. Rolled it out. It was just their proprietary product. Yeah, exactly. I spent a lot of time over that break working on it. So it was a good part-time job, and launched helped them grow from being in 3 states to national. For a few years, it was a part-time job for myself, just maintaining that for just my one client. And then slowly over time, saw more opportunities of, hey, I did this for one client. I didn't like the job I was doing at the time. A few years later, this has been a nice side job for a while. So I figured, let me quit a 6-figure job, go into my own business in an apartment I can't really afford. What could go wrong? So that was pretty much what happened. You're going to talk about lessons learned, I'm sure, in a little bit. And from there, it just took so much time to ramp up and get the product and sell it to other people in the industry, making every mistake possible. Like I said, I wasn't necessarily the best developer, had no sales experience formally before this. So steep learning curve. That was about 7 years ago. Still kicking now. We've figured out a lot of that stuff, work with both banks, credit unions, mortgage companies, still title agents all throughout the country. just under 200 clients, probably about a little over 2 million transactions a year going through our system. So easier to look back now, but it's been a very long journey to get there.
I'm sure. That's such a cool story.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that I had mentioned in particular that I heard you say that I'm a big advocate for as well too, is having that kind of subject matter expertise, right? You mentioned a family business that you were involved with, fairly familiar with, got to understand some serious problems in the space, but highly specialized to that industry. And that really set you up well. I mean, despite the fact that you had a great background for it in engineering, right? Like natural problem solver, is that you truly understood the industry very well because you kind of had experience in it.
I did and I didn't, I think. I think it makes sense.
Probably thought so at the time.
You won't. You're only listening to that one company, and that was the problem. And it was a little myopic in that perspective. And, obviously there's something to be said for an outsider coming in and not knowing the industry. But it was definitely helpful in connections and having that client that probably wasn't going to fire you at the end of the day. So it was a good sandbox for a lot of those things. Plenty of other early clients of ours did fire us, so it was good to, always have that fallback.
Have that balance.
Yep, sure. And then what was the point I was going to get to? I think it made for a more authentic story, to your point, saying like, moving boxes with the title company, starting that way, like being in the industry, talking about the ups and downs. I think it's been a helpful thing to really bond with people when you're in the sales process and, trying to be authentic at that point.
Absolutely. Did you feel that your experience working with the family business and knowing the industry a little bit more than someone else, like myself, who previously may not have had that experience, were to start a business? Did you feel that, like you said, came off a little bit more authentic when you were in that sales process, talking to other people for the first time, explaining, what LodeStar was and what it was going to be able to do to help them? Did the fact that you had kind of some industry expertise, did that aid you in your efforts of helping them solve problems?
It definitely opened more doors, and I think it's, a good way of making that connection early on. The other thing in technology, I think you're more likely to see people who, have a technology background, no industry background, and they think they can just go in and solve some problem. And, in some cases have a lot of money behind them to do that. And what you see with the solution is it can be very pretty, it can look great, but it doesn't necessarily do what it needs to do. So, so many people, get a hammer and look for a nail, right? Opposed to kind of growing organically out of industry problems and trying to fix them that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. Another thing you mentioned as part of your background too, which I draw more attention to, in that you didn't kind of dive in at first immediately. You worked in industry, you had, you were working elsewhere and you were working on this at the same time, which I think is another thing that doesn't get enough credit, as far as like, I typically recommend you set yourself up for the long haul, right? Because I think there's a lot of material out there that talks about this world being like a sprint. It's a race to the finish, and if you don't get there, it's over. And to me, I think that's a bit misleading. Instead, I think you should set you up for something that's more sustainable than that. And like you said, once you start to get traction, now you can shift gears and potentially go into that full time, which that thing looks fairly sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I arguably probably went in much sooner than I should have too, but hindsight's 20/20.
True.
And then no, you're not going to learn as quickly as if you don't do something full time. To your point, I really like the phrase, it takes years to be an overnight success. And people generally see the end. You're all right. They go, oh, you're here so quick. You've done so much. And, you don't see the 10 years plus the time that it gets to get there. So my advice, I try to talk to as many founders, other people in business as possible. And it takes so much time. And just the more you can do before you have that kind of full-time cushion to go into, or at least money saved up, like time is your best friend as an entrepreneur. And I did not do nearly enough to make sure I really bought myself time. I honestly thought it was going to be quick and easy, and I was sadly mistaken. I often make the comment, if someone had told 26-year-old me before I made the switch of the things you were going to go through and how hard it was going to be, I don't know if at the time I would have opted in to that.
Agreed.
So ignorance is bliss in a certain way. And I mean, in hindsight, I would have done it again in a heartbeat. Would have made some of the decisions that probably made things a little bit easier. I feel like going through it, I made kind of every small business mistake imaginable, from giving away equity to a friend who you thought was going to be a good co-founder, and, you know, all those types of challenges, not having a good market fit, no idea how to price, which I think can often be a problem in SaaS, especially B2B. So, you know, there's a learning curve, and you kind of just have to do a lot of everything.
I call it Chief Everything Officer,
Yeah.
CEO, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the overnight success is important to recognize
Yeah.
as well too. I often share a very similar sentiment, which is the one that's usually shared about Airbnb, which I'm sure you've heard, is it took them 5 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
Right. For years, they were banging on doors and people were just tossing them out. All of a sudden, it just started clicking. And then, of course, like you said, hindsight's 2020. Everybody that is using Airbnb, like on the earlier side of things from their experience and perspective, it's like, this is brilliant. Why didn't I think of this?
Right.
I'm like, oh man, you're missing so much to that story.
Yeah.
It's like that just oversimplifies everything.
Right.
So excellent points. So you had mentioned, right, along the way, making mistakes. Your experience is so similar to mine. It's like eerie, where family business for the most part, involved with, started my own SaaS business, started too early, made lots of mistakes. Right? I would say it's arguably the best educational experience I've had to date. I've had a few other really good ones as well too. So I'd love to hear from you as far as what you would have done differently had you to do it again. And that could also be, you know, advice for those looking to do it into the future.
Yeah. So, man, getting a hard-hitting question early in the morning too.
That's a loaded question.
I would have done things too. I think it's in a few different categories. I think one of which was kind of how you manage things personally. I mean, for me, I put a lot of personal stress on myself because of, you know, I was living in an expensive area in Manhattan. I put my living expenses to my old salary, not my new salary. So I was just burning money and creating a lot of undue pressure on myself. So, you know, however long you think something's going to take, double it, triple it. You know, there was a point in time through the business, I was paying myself $3,000 a month. That was my take home. Probably about $2,500, if not more of that, was just rent, because it was Manhattan. That was just paying the landlord, you know, electricity, cable, and then not even everything else. Everything else was on credit cards. So, you know, that was not a sustainable point of living. So, you know, I talked to people. I talked to a 24-year-old who now just quit his job last week, starting a business. He's living at home. I'm like, great. I wish I had done, you know, it has its drawbacks, but I think a lot of it was personal choice of, you know, I wish I had, you know, not put myself into the amount of credit card debt that I did, that took me years to get out of, and kind of that pressure. So that was probably one of the things. Bringing in the wrong people early on, you know, thinking, you know, I had a thought at the time. I basically brought on a co-founder that ended up not being the right fit. And I did have a thought at the time when I was giving equity of either it's going to work out with him and we'll make it, or if it doesn't work out with him, we just won't be a success at all. And that was the wrong way to think about it. You know, my recommendation is, when you can pay people cash, pay people cash. Keep that equity, you know, as tight as possible. One of the things we did that I don't think was a mistake, and I would love to kind of get your thoughts on more, is, you know, we've very much been a bootstrap business. We had a friends and family round, which I could rant about as well, has its own issues. But we did that, and that really just allowed me to bring on our now CTO, another friend. And really that's been the only funding that we've had. So bootstrapping from there has its advantages. You know, I don't think, I think we are different in the way we haven't really sought out a lot of VC funding. You know, it's tough when you see a lot of people out there raising $5 million, $10 million, more than that. I'm sure you've seen that in your own way.
All the time.
And then, you know, when people are spreading like that, how do you know, it's kind of the tortoise and the hare, right? How do you stay sane? How do you not get distracted by that? How do you not get frustrated by that? How do you kind of balance?
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
I want to address that.
Sorry, I threw out like five different things.
No, it's amazing. I also want to summarize what you said, because they're excellent points. So I would summarize: number one, set yourself up for the long haul.
Yeah.
Right? That's important. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Number two, choose your team members and teammates wisely and protect your company, right, at all costs. like we just mentioned, based on the previous point, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So set yourself up for that long haul, and realize that some things you try are not going to work out, right? I had a similar experience to you. Co-founder, we were great friends. We both had plenty of skills that we bring to the table, but ultimately just personality-wise, ambition-wise, the things that we wanted just were not aligned, and that came out at the worst possible time. And then exactly. So like that's what happens when you pressed up against the wall like this. And then the third point, which is what I want to talk about more to your question, which I think is an excellent one, is whether or not to seek outside funding when necessary, or if you even if you don't need it, right? If it can help you grow faster and so on and so forth. I am squarely in the side of yours as well too. Whenever you can pay people cash, pay them cash. I think that's important, especially even if you're considering adding someone to your team down the road, right? Cash upfront gives you an idea what it's like to work with that individual, and then if interests become aligned, mutually aligned, now I think it's worth having potentially a conversation about, hey, do you want to kind of join forces here? Here's what that's going to look like, right? And be brutally honest and upfront about the whole thing, because it's like, look, this is going to get difficult. There's going to be time where you're working way more than you think you're going to be, that kind of a thing. So try to break the deal before you try to make the deal, kind of thing. And then with regard to funding, I agree with you as well too. Honestly, I've had a number of VCs and people that are in the investment community told me that if you don't need to raise, don't. And they've been very specific about why, and I've experienced that through the companies that I've helped. It is a lot of hoops to jump through. It's a lot more cooks in the kitchen. It's a lot more people vying for control and direction of your company and so on and so forth. So it could do anything from steer you down the wrong path, influence you to make executive decisions you don't want to make, or like strip the passion away from what it is that you're doing. And I think that's the biggest killer. Where it's like, I'm doing this because it's not a typical job. Like that's one of the reasons why we do it, right? So like the last thing I want to do is be like deflated or defeated at all in what it is that I'm doing and make this become boring, monotonous routine. And chasing the wrong things, right? Is like I very, very quickly learned, and I'd love to get your take on this as well too, that there's been a bunch of ideas that I wanted to have chased, but ultimately I realized some of them that I were chasing were strictly for the fact that they had potential and could be successful, but I wasn't passionate about them. And I've learned hard lesson where it's like, if you're not passionate about what it is that you're doing and it's this path that we're describing, it's not going to last. So you're just going to burn out for one reason or another.
Well, I think it's important to define that too, because I'm not passionate about mortgage calculators. At the end of the day, what I enjoy is being my own boss, running my own business. I like working in the mortgage industry, the real estate industry. It touches every aspect of every person's life and has a great impact on the economy. But I think it's important to say, like, kind of put a fine point on that of what do you like about, because the SaaS industry, you're going to get into very strange, very narrow kind of implementations. And to your point, anytime I've talked to anyone who's been successful and as a company they're still running 10 years plus, you ask them what they do, who they work with, their niche is so narrow of what they do. I can tell you the exact type of client I want from the software they use, their volume, where in the country they may be, the types of states they work in. It's just from talking to so many people who aren't that. And I think it takes a while to get to that point. But going back to your point, this is going to be a question for you, kind of about, seeing people going through the VC funding and that stage. And, I've seen it enough where that becomes your full-time job, especially as a CEO. But then how do you see people who do that and you see the other end of how fast they can ramp up, how fast they can grow. And then, especially if they're a competitor of yours or peer or someone even younger than you, how does that not frustrate you?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It can be very distracting. The first point you made, where it's basically a full-time job, I agree with that also. And so there's a local startup, or one of the startup stories that I'm familiar with, two female founders, and that I'm friends with. When I was meeting with one of the founders, I was asking her where her co-founder was, and she's like, "Oh, she's raising." So the two of them weren't even working together at that point because of just how much time it takes. But to your point with like the distraction, and you not become distracted by that. It's so enticing to think, and like it's easy to kind of glorify what this world looks like, as far as, wow, they have $5 million. Like, think about what I could do with that money, how much faster I could move, how much people I can hire, that kind of thing. It's one of those things where, like, if you play that card, you can't put it back in the deck. So I try to remind myself that, where it's like, there's a time and a place.
Right.
And I think definitely, venture capital has its place and certainly can help. What I would caution people against is glorifying that world and what it can be, because it is a lot murkier than I think people realize it is until you're actually deep inside. I was meeting with investors just yesterday for a client of mine, and I was waiting for basically 2 hours before they would even see me. So, and like it's an hour both ways, like it's back and forth. It's like
it's your day.
It's relatively mild when it comes to what you might be dealing with, but it's just there's so much more that you're not thinking about that you're going to be involved with.
Well, then you look at their business model. Say they're investing $5 to $10 million. They're going to do that with 20-something companies. Hope that one or two are successful.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And drive in. And ultimately, I wonder how much when they're pumping money into businesses like that, the goal may not even be profitability. The goal may be to let's just get the valuation to a point where we can sell this company and make more money. So it's really, it's kind of counterintuitive to what you think of a business that's actually, going off its own profits and things like that. And I mean, we've been profitable since 2013, 2014. I forget the point where we had, maybe 2015. Sorry.
Oh, good.
It's been a while, but at the point, and then we've bought out investors from the friends and family round. So, having your own money to make those choices and do those things is very, very good and helpful, but it limits your options because you can only focus on so much. I think one thing too, when people start a company, especially in the SaaS industry, there's a lot of other ways to get capital that aren't VC, especially in SaaS, when generally if you have a recurring revenue model, like the majority of SaaS companies do, you're very bankable in certain ways. So that's been, at least for me, an avenue to look of, okay, do I have a line of credit with my bank? What are my credit cards? Those are things you hope you don't have to use, but when you need them, you can't get them. So, being able to look at those kind of different options and things like that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When you need it, there are other options that isn't the traditional route, so to speak. Probably my best piece of advice for someone who is considering raising is don't do it to get off the ground, do it to grow faster.
Yeah.
Like you're already growing, you're already doing well. Like for someone like yourself running your business, you're already profitable, you're growing, all of that is great. So you have a demonstrated equation that says, if you give me $1, I can turn it into 3, or I can turn it into 4. And that's what investors are really looking for, especially on the East Coast I've seen.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because you already have that equation kind of figured out, right? You know who your customer is, you know who they're not. And at that point, you could grow faster if you want to, but it's your choice.
Yeah.
I think the second component of that is control. I would always want someone to maintain executive control, controlling interest of their entity.
Yeah.
As I don't want them to give the keys away, so to speak. So if you can maintain at least 51% of control, then you ultimately are the one making the decision as far as what to do and what not to do when it comes to day-to-day of the business.
And if you have to your point, business that's a little further along, it's easier to do that opposed to just having a great idea and nothing else. I was at a networking event, and some version of this happens to me pretty much all the time, where someone came up to me, he was probably in his 50s or something like that, had I think just got an MBA, and was talking, and he goes, I have an idea. It's a little out there though. And you just kind of nod and you say, okay, because they're going to tell you in like 30 seconds anyway. He's like, imagine if there's a place you can exchange goods and services on the blockchain. And I'm just sitting there. He's like, say you were looking to get your hair cut. Bam, it's there. We're looking to get your lawn mowed. Bam, it's there. And trying not to be like too pithy or too much of a jerk to this guy, I'm like, have you heard of Google?
Yeah.
And also all too often in this industry, people get, a technology that's new and it's a buzzword like AI or blockchain, and you go, oh, let's just apply it to everything, opposed to kind of looking at a problem and finding a way to fix it. So, that's, I guess, a little different from our VC rant, but
still, excellent point.
And that happens. I'm sure you've had your own experiences with something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Steer people whenever I can towards the problem and not the solution.
Yeah.
That's basically what you're referring to. And I agree. It comes up all the time. My pet peeves now are AI and ML and all the artificial intelligence, and it's thrown around everywhere. Well, if we just use artificial intelligence, and it takes me back to engineering school where professors would say, part of our like design and engineering projects, they'd say, look, you can't say, insert magic here and then magic comes out this side of that box. That's not how any of this works. Like you have to make sure that what you're talking about is really theoretically actually possible in the real world. So don't do any of that kind of stuff. And that's what I think about when people say like, well, I know, what if we just did this? And we'll just use AI for that. It's like, okay, well, despite the fact that AI doesn't really even exist yet.
You're really just talking about machine learning.
Exactly.
Anyway,
like you're just talking about software, basically.
Which made me think, I don't know if you're a South Park fan, but there's the underwear gnomes episode 2, collect underpants. Step 3, make profits.
Step 2, no detail.
Wait, what's step 2? I don't know.
It's awesome. Good stuff. Well, Jim, I can't thank you enough for being here. It's been super helpful sharing the story with myself and the listeners and the content we spoke about. I have 2 other questions for you before I let you go. The first one is, what resources would you recommend for other people in and around the SaaS world, like myself and our listeners?
Other founders, I think, at the end of the day. And I think one of the mistakes I made early on was not getting enough kind of mentorship or even just peers or people in the industry going through a similar process. Honestly, there's so much of doing this that can be very isolating. You can't really talk about some things with your coworkers because they're involved. It's a little too sensitive. They're close to it. So having other people that you can talk to that have been through similar challenges, honestly, it's like group therapy. It's very helpful to be able to have those outlets, those people's brains to pick. Nothing's going to be 100% like what you're doing, but there are a lot of similar challenges. So that would really be what I would seek out on a larger level. For me, what was helpful beyond that was just being industry specific. So, going to conferences, getting out there, talking to people, building up a network of people that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, clients, obviously, referral sources, even people in the industry that may be selling to the same people as you, but has a non-competing product. So there's a lot of things that you can do there on a more industry specific level. And every industry, especially in the SaaS world, is going to have some sort of group, some sort of conference, probably at a casino, because that's how it usually is.
Great.
So, finding that and getting your ass there, you're going to learn, a lot.
Totally agree. 2 excellent points. The first I would reiterate and totally agree with, which is like finding a coach and having that right support system. I realized at some point building my own SaaS businesses that I was doing arguably the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And when I was doing hard things previously, like whether it be school or sports or whatever, I always had a coach. And now for whatever reason I didn't. So I saw one out, arguably the best decision I made since I started running my own businesses. So that's an excellent point. And then finding your industry, getting specific is also excellent. I think the misconception there is that if I niche down, I'm going to eliminate all these possible opportunities. But in fact, we often see the exact opposite happen. So much so that the common phrases come up, it's niche to get rich, right? I'm sure you've heard
I haven't heard that actually. That's a good one.
I've heard a couple different variations of that, and I firmly believe it. So once you figure out how to get more specific, do it.
Well, saying no is very important, but very difficult when you start, because if you don't have a lot of clients or a lot of business, why not say yes? What is your time worth? Right. But then if something's not going to lead to recurring revenue or a product you can resell, it's the wrong path.
Good point. So once you have the data, use that data to figure out, okay, how do I get more specific with the traction I have so far? That's a great process. And then last question for you is, who should reach out to you and how can they get in touch?
Anyone who, to my point before, running a business, wants to talk about it, wants to vent, or if you're in the real estate mortgage industries, would love to talk to you as well. You can go on our website, LodeStarSS.com, LodeStarSS.com. I have my blog there. You can send in a request to meet. Anything else, find me on LinkedIn at Jim Paolino. And looking forward to talking to you.
Excellent. Great. Thanks for being here and sharing your advice, Jim.
Great.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Product Launch Podcast powered by Next Step. If you or anyone you know is involved in scaling a B2B SaaS business, please have them reach out to me about becoming a potential guest on our show. They can email me at sean@nextstep.io. That's SEAN@nxtstep.io. This time, we'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of our show, Next Step Consulting. Would you like to know what the right next steps are for your B2B SaaS business? Are you trying to grow and scale, but you're stuck? We can help. To find out how Next Step can help your B2B SaaS business achieve its goals, please email me, Sean@nextstep.io. That's SEAN@nxtstep.io. Thanks, and keep disrupting.